I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to do our resume workshop a little bit different this fall. We're breaking it into two parts because what we've realized is that the formatting itself and the structure of the resume really needs its own special set of time because there's a lot of details that have to do with how it's structured, how it's formatted, and then the content section, we're going to do that next Thursday. So be sure and sign up for that one too. That's kind of a next level resume, and we'll also talk about cover letters at that one. But for this workshop, we're going to be focusing on the basics, and it's not going to be super interactive. This isn't going to be one of those kind of fun things where we, have quizzes and things like that. We're going to get in and get as much done as we can in this time period. And we're going to talk about the structure of the resume, the formatting of the resume, and then towards the end, we're even going to actually do a screen share with Microsoft Word and show you some of the techniques that we use that really help make the resume easier to format and make it cleaner. And we'll give you some of the special techniques that you can use so that you don't have to really wrestle with Word, because we know it can be a little trying. So, okay, I want to start out also by saying that the information we're going to give you is the most up-to-date information that we have on formatting resumes. And we are in conferences, we're on webinars, we're talking to professionals, we're talking to recruiters all the time, and they're giving us this information. So even though you might hear different things from, maybe you have a mentor, maybe one of your parents' friends said, let me look at your resume, something like that. You may have different input on your resume. We want you to know that we're hearing this directly from recruiters. So the information we're sharing with you is what we've heard directly from people that have the potential to do hiring. So, okay, so let's get started. What is a resume? Really, that's kind of a basic question. I know you guys are all thinking, of course, we know what a resume is, but what a resume really is a way for you to show a recruiter or an employer what you bring to the table. And so it has to be as clear and as concise as possible. And it communicates your skills, your experience, your education, and it has to do it in a clear and concise way. And really, it's a way to get an interview. It's the first step in the hiring process so that an employer or recruiter can look at that resume and say, this is someone I want to talk to. Now, you may have heard along the way that a lot of big companies are using what we call applicant tracking systems. And so a lot of people are very concerned about whether a computer is reading their resume, if an AI is reading their resume. The best practices for a human are the same as the best practices for an applicant tracking system. So we're going to talk about how to make sure your resume is clear and concise. And those principles will apply for both situations, whether it's a human or an applicant tracking system that's reading your resume. Okay, all right. So one thing we want to point out is that there's a difference between a resume and a CV, especially for our international students. Those two terms are often interchangeable, and you might hear someone say, oh yeah, send me your CV. And you kind of wonder, okay, is that different from a resume, or are we talking about the same thing? Some people will use them interchangeably, but in the most traditional sense, a resume is basically for employment. It emphasizes your skills, your education. For anyone with less than about 8 years experience, it should really just be one page. It can be as long as 2 pages, but never longer than that. Again, it talks about your education, your experiences, and what you bring to the table. A CV, on the other hand, really emphasizes your academic accomplishments, and it can be as long as it needs to be, and it needs to have a ton of detail. And in a lot of grad schools will expect a CV, and you'll put your examples of papers that you've written, anything that you possibly had published, any kind of projects that you did, anything like that. So a CV has a lot more has a lot more detail than a resume. But we wanted to make sure we brought that up in case you've heard those terms used interchangeably.
Like, do you suggest to have both a CV and a resume, or
It depends what you're applying for. If you're applying for employment, internship, anything like that, you really just need a resume. Now, if you're wanting to pursue further graduate school, or if you want to go to graduate school after undergrad, then a CV is appropriate, but a resume is really what you need for employment. So it really depends on what you're applying for. All right, thanks for asking. All right. Okay, so I said there weren't going to be any quizzes, but I do have one quiz. So how many seconds does the average recruiter spend on a resume? So I could tell you guys to go, you can go ahead, you put it in the chat if you want. I'm totally fine with that. It's I don't know if I want to call it a trick question, but if anybody has been at any of our previous resume workshops, they already know the answer to this.
Some have guessed 6 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds, and 10 seconds.
Okay, so this used to be a trick question, but now so that is spot on. It is around 7 seconds. So the reason why we ask you this question and the reason why we're giving you this information is, can you imagine how your resume has to be so completely straightforward? If someone's only taking 7 seconds to look at it, you can't make them work for any of the information. So, and when I say work for it, I've seen templates, I've seen different types of resumes where people they might have a section that says what I've learned, what I've done, what I can do, things like that. That just makes the recruiter have to work. So don't try to get fancy or, and I know we always want you to be creative. So this really goes against everything I believe in. Don't get creative with your resume. Make sure you're as straightforward as possible. And that reason is because of this 7 seconds. So, okay. I know you're going to look at this and you're going to say it's the most boring resume I've ever seen. Boring is good. Okay. So the look of the resume should be very straightforward. But it's the content that really separates what makes you stand out from the next person. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the details with content in our workshop next week, but we're going to hit on some high points. Now, this is a standard resume format. So here are the most important things about this. Number one, it's in reverse chronological order. And that goes for all the sections, okay? So with your experience, what reverse chronological means is your most recent position is first, then the next most recent, the next most recent, and so on. Okay. With your education, it's the same thing. If you're a graduate student and you're currently at the University of Dallas, that goes first. And then underneath that is your undergrad degree. Okay. And that's same thing for campus and community involvement. Now you can get a little creative with campus and community involvement if you have, some overlapping experience and you want to highlight a particular thing that you did. You can play around a little bit in that section. But in your experience section and your education section, make sure that you have it in reverse chronological order. So that's the first thing. And then you'll notice here too that we, in this sample resume, we used bold, italics, and we don't use underline in the text itself, but we use these lines here. And we're going to show you how we did all this so you don't have to draw lines. We use those and we use the bullets and we use indenting and things like that. We flush the dates on the right. We do all these things to create consistency and to highlight the things that we want to highlight. Okay, so obviously the name is in bold. The sections are in bold. The university's in bold. You don't over bold, because if you do, then nothing looks important. Okay, so this is a way for us to highlight the things that we think are important. And you can play with this too. You can choose to highlight the name of the company in a certain way. Maybe you want to highlight that you worked at a Big Four accounting firm for an internship or something like that. So again, it's something that you can, this is where you can get a little creative trying to figure out what you want to bold and highlight, but all in all, you'll see that it's very straightforward. You'll notice we also use columns in the skills section. We don't have all the skills listed. We used columns there so that we could save some room. Okay, straightforward resume. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the individual sections. Okay, so there are some common resume sections. You can have some flexibility here, and it depends on the type of position that you're applying for. But the basic ones that you're looking for are education, experience, and skills. Now, I would add to this, especially for undergraduates, campus and community involvement. You can have your clubs and orgs and things like that in that section. But you need your education, you need experience, which is what you've done. Now, some undergrads will play around a little bit with that, and if they were, say, president of a club, they might want to put that in experience rather than campus and community involvement. You can be flexible on that, but those are the basic areas that you want to include. Now, some optional sections are relevant coursework, class projects, and a link to an online portfolio. And here's the thing with relevant coursework. It works in a couple of different ways. For starters, if you don't have a lot on your resume, if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you don't have a lot of experience, you can include a relevant coursework section to kind of give you a little bit more space, give you a little bit more, to add to your resume. It can also work well if you're a graduate student and you're looking for a career change. You can include some of the advanced courses that you've taken. Now, it's important here that for relevant coursework that you don't include things like lit trad. And, if you're applying for a finance internship, that you don't include your very most basic courses, even your most basic business courses like business communications or foundations or anything like that. You want to save relevant coursework for things that are actually, relevant for the position, because the employers aren't looking for your foundational classes. They're looking to see which of your higher level classes that you've taken. And in the class projects section, that one's really great too for graduate students, because that's a place where you can actually show the skills that you've been building and how you've applied those skills. And for undergrads as well, to show the different kinds of projects that you're working on. And what's important in this section is that you include what the purpose of the project was, what your role was, and what the results were. Okay, so you need to include those things and not just say something like developed marketing plan for business or something like that. What was your role? I was the leader. I was, I facilitated the Excel analysis or something like that, and that it was presented to the class or something like that. And then lastly, an online portfolio for those of you that maybe if you're writing for the campus newspaper, or you've done some graphic design, or even if you've done some coding projects, anything like that, you can link to an online portfolio to share those. It's a lot better than listing a whole bunch of links to different things that you've written or published. If you can put them all in an online portfolio, then that would work. We can give you some links. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I know there are several different online portfolios that you can use to gather up your work. Okay, does anybody have any questions about resume sections? Because I know I kind of, spewed all that out at once. Spewed.
So I have a question. So in your experience, in the experience section, how detailed we need to be?
So when you talk about detail, you definitely need to put the name of the company, you need to put your job title, the name of the company, and then the point of listing the bullets is not to list every single task that you had. The point is to show what your accomplishments were in that position. So, and we actually have some sample bullets. Is that in this one, guys, or is that in the next one? The next one. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about how to write the bullets next week, but we do have some sample. If you look at these samples, I think it'll give you a good idea of how detailed. So you don't need to put, let me give you an example that I see a lot. Someone that's applying for a position in accounts payable. Maybe they have a similar job in accounts payable, and they start listing process checks, handled AR, handled accounts receivable and accounts payable for month-end processing. That's exactly what you would expect an accounts payable person to do. So you're really not adding anything to your story by saying that. So if you say something to the effect of processed 300 invoices per week, or something like that, then you've actually given it some context. You've shown what exactly your accomplishments and your results were for that position. So the one thing that we see a lot that people do is copy and paste the job description from their previous jobs. And that's something you really want to avoid, because you don't want to have an entire long laundry list of every task that you did in that job. You want to focus on the things that are most impactful. Okay, and we can definitely talk about that in a little bit more detail. And I think the samples are pretty good too, and they can kind of show you a little bit about that. So, okay, so this is how we like to format the contact information. You don't need to put your full street address, because if you think about it, if you're applying online, which 99% of the time these days you're going to be applying in some format online, then or filling out some type of online application and uploading your resume, you're going to be including your address in that anyway. And you really don't necessarily want your entire street address floating around the internet. So it's totally fine if you're an undergrad and you live on campus or close to campus, put Irving, Texas. Now, if you're applying for an internship for when you go back home next summer, you might want to put your permanent address if you're applying for companies, close to home. You've got your phone number, email address, and a hyperlink to your LinkedIn. And Christina's going to show you how to do a hyperlink if you don't know how to do that, instead of putting your copy and pasting your entire LinkedIn address here. One thing that I want to point out, you don't need to put address : Irving, Texas, cell phone : and then your phone number, email : and then your email address. It's obvious that that's what those are. So you're just saving space. Again, you're being as clear and concise as possible. You can, and I've actually seen this a couple of times recently with students that go by a middle name. And of course, that's obviously what you've done for years, so that's totally fine, but you might want to specify, if you do that, that by putting your middle name in quotation marks on your resume, because, pardon me, sometimes someone can't find you on LinkedIn if you don't specify, or they see that your email address looks different from the name on the resume, and they might think that they made a transcription mistake or something like that. So it's just a good idea to be consistent across those.
And I would highly recommend it, especially if you don't go by your first name. So I don't go by my first name. Everything is Christina. My first name is Min. If you looked up Min Nguyen, you would have thousands of people, and they would be male because most men are named Min. So something you need to do, so like what I do on all of my things, I put Min in quotations, Christina, so everyone knows I go by Christina, and then, everything moving forward. So that's why if you try to look me on LinkedIn, like you'll see Min Christina Nguyen, and that's why, is because my email address is M, and I cannot tell you how many times people go, is this your email address? Like, I don't think it's right. So you just want to make sure, because that's an easy indicator for them to know if it's really you.
One of the themes that you're going to see and what we talk about is constantly make it as easy as possible for the recruiter. So you have to think about the fact that, especially if it's a big company, they might have gotten a stack of 1,000. Of course, now the sirens are going off. I don't know if you guys can hear those in my neighborhood. They're distracting me. They might get a stack of 1,000 resumes, and they need reasons to say no. Okay, so a recruiter has to take all these resumes and whittle them down and give them to the hiring manager in a manageable form. So they're going to try to say no as many times as they can. And if you've done something on your resume that makes the AI or the applicant tracking system not able to read it, if you've used a bunch of weird tables or a weird font or something like that, or included company logos or things that you thought looked fancy, if you do that, then the ATS might kick it out. Then the recruiter's not going to say, oh, I feel so bad. I'm going to go back and find this giant stack of resumes and find some that I can look through and give to the recruiter. You're just going to get in the no pile. So it's a lot easier to just start out simple. So, okay.
I have a question. So whenever we specify, like, for example, the amount of checks we process, do we put it in words or do we actually put like numbers so that way they can see it closer?
So you said accomplishments when you put accomplishments?
No, so like I remember you were just talking about how whenever we have to specify exactly what we did. So for example, I processed 30 checks.
Yeah.
For like accounts payable. Do we put the actual number or do we write it in words?
I would
so can see it.
Number on anything over 10 usually is a good rule, is to actually put the number. And if you think somebody's scanning your resume, and if they're scanning, and they see the number 3, they might not catch that. But if they see the number, they see in the number in digit form, it's going to jump out at them. So if you can quantify as much as possible, processed 30 checks, had 20 increased, and even think about this if you're working at a restaurant, that you waited on approximately 10 tables per shift, or something like that. Anything that you can put to quantify. And another reason why is that really gives it some weight and gives it credibility. If you actually took the time to quantify this, then that's a hard number. People believe numbers when they see them. So that gives it some weight.
I also have a question.
Yeah, sure.
So I noticed on the previous slide, you had a LinkedIn put right up at the top there. Should we have a LinkedIn? Would that be something you recommend?
Yeah, I would. And we have a workshop planned for LinkedIn. And I'll tell you this right, I'm just going to cut to the chase on LinkedIn. You really need to spend some time to make it amazing. If you don't have the time to spend to make it amazing, basically put what's on your resume on your LinkedIn. Okay, that's the easy way. Now, if you really are ready to get really serious about applying for internships and jobs, and you want to do all the tips and tricks for LinkedIn, then you can really spend some great time to make it perfect and just get it right ready for LinkedIn. In the meantime, we recommend that you take what's on your resume and put that on your LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you.
Resources on the site, and we're having a workshop on it too.
Yeah, and I would say too is that the reason we ask you to have a LinkedIn is not because we want you to be on it because you have to. It's because that's what recruiters and external people are using. So people who are in like the professional world, especially if you're like trying to network with like alumni or anything like that, they're just already on LinkedIn because they're using that as their professional platform. In addition, the really good, I would say incentive too is that it gives you a digital footprint. So LinkedIn has basically paid to be the #1 search when they search by name in Google. So if someone searches for you, it's more than likely the first 5 links that pop up will be a LinkedIn. So if someone searches for you and you're applying for something and they, search your name on Google, then your LinkedIn can come up right away and then they'll be able to find you really quickly. And they can look at what you've been doing and things like that. And then like we said too with Shannon, it's like you put whatever's on your resume, but LinkedIn is a chance for you to expand. So you're not limited to one page. You have more, I would say like more room to play with.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to go into detail in that workshop because we've gotten some really good feedback from recruiters about things like headlines and that sort of thing. So we'll definitely get into more detail about that soon. But yes. Okay, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because this is something we can actually spend a little bit more time on in the next one if people have questions. But, there's kind of a push and pull about whether you should include an objective or a summary or either one on your resume, frankly. A lot of people are just not even including these anymore on their resume because recruiters are really looking more at your experience bullets and your results and things like that. But especially, like I said before, if you are just getting started, and you really need something to kind of fill in your resume, a summary is a great way to do that. If you're changing careers, you can kind of use an objective and a summary combination, because then it can show that you have this particular experience, but you're seeking, something different. So an objective is basically saying, this is what I'm looking for. This is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. And here's an example: high-performing economics students with leadership, research, and customer service experience, seeking challenging position in a financial services organization. This is all fine and good, but you have to look at it from a recruiter standpoint. Does this tell me a ton? Not really. It's a bit vague. But a summary actually is details what you bring to the table. English major and honor student with a record of academic and extracurricular success, extensive leadership experience. Again, it's vague, don't get me wrong, but you're basically saying, this is what I bring to the table, and these are my skills. Again, some recruiters may just kind of zip past it and look straight for your experience, your bullets, your skills, things like that. But it has its place if you have room for it. And our sample has a summary. Okay, education. This is our preferred format for education. Bold the name of the university, and then comma, Irving, Texas, and then that's not bolded. Now, sometimes I flip this, especially if I kind of play with this a little bit. Sometimes I put Bachelor of Arts first, because especially if it's, for instance, if you're looking for an internship, and let's say you're a cybersecurity student and you're looking for an internship in cybersecurity, you may want that to be the thing that stands out most. So you can put the degree first and the university next. If you know that there's an alumnus working at a particular place and you want them to see that it's University of Dallas, you may want to put the university first. Always put your degree and spell it out, and then put your major there too. Now you'll see this, we have GPA. I don't want to insinuate that there's anything wrong with a GPA under 3.5, because there's absolutely not, but unless the application specifically asks you for GPA, don't include it unless it's over a 3.5. Now, if your major GPA is higher than your overall GPA, then you can put major GPA : and then put it, if it's a 3.7. But make sure you put that. Don't try to play the game to say, oh, well, I meant that 3.7 was my major GPA. I just didn't put that. Be upfront, and say major GPA 3.7 or whatever. If you go to Rome, be sure and put it. A lot of students forget to put study abroad, and employers love that. They love a global perspective. They love the fact that you went off for an entire semester and made it through. So be sure to put that. Again, you can put your student clubs and organizations under your education. You see we've got relevant coursework here also under education, or you can pull those out into the separate sections. I told you don't be creative, but you do have some flexibility.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Here you have written like May 2022, the expected date. So should we write expected here, or we can simply write the future date?
It's implied, and we used to put expected or something like that, anticipated sometimes. But if you think about it, if we're trying to be as concise as possible, it's obvious that May 2022 is an anticipated date. So you just really need to put
Okay.
you expect to graduate. So yeah, that's a good question. And like I said, we used to do that, but now, so much of it's just like I said, when people used to put email : and then put their email, everybody knows that's your email address. And some of that came from because we used to put home phone, cell phone, things like that, but that's just not necessary anymore. So
Thank you.
I have another question. If we belong to a particular fraternity, can we include that here?
absolutely. And I know like SIE, this is where you would put sigma, iota, epsilon. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I got it. This is where you would put SIE. Again, and depending on how much campus involvement you have, if you've got a lot, make it a separate section. Things, and also what's not on here, or I'm sorry, it is on here, provost scholarship. If you have any scholarships, then this would be a section for that too.
Okay, and one more question I have is that we get digital badge.
Mhm.
So can we include that as well?
I would include that there. And now if you have some other kind of certification that is more than just a badge, that is some sort of, sometimes what is it that the Amazon Cloud, whatever some of those highly specified certifications, those would need to be on their own line, because that's really something you're wanting to highlight and showcase. I think a badge is good under this section, especially if it's one of the badges that's a combination of the classes that you're taking that are part of your degree, but like it's your cybersecurity or cyber intelligence badge or pen testing or whatever the badges are, then that's a good place to put that. But if it's a full-on certification, it needs to have its own spot.
So we can directly put the image of the badge within this section?
The image of the badge, I would just put the text of what it is. I would say for your LinkedIn, because if you were handing your resume to somebody, it would be cool to have those badges on there. And if you knew someone was looking at it with their eyes, but if this goes through an applicant tracking system, it's not going to read it anyway.
Okay. Thank you.
And I had a question. Could we give a hyperlink to our LinkedIn profile in the resume?
The hyperlink, yeah, we definitely recommend up here the hyperlink to go. You'll see on the heading here, LinkedIn needs to be a hyperlink to your LinkedIn. Definitely. But that's for it. Definitely include it there. I wouldn't include it anywhere else.
Yeah.
Okay. There's education. Okay, so for the skills section, what you need to focus on in the skills section are your hard skills. Now you're going to hear all the time, oh, employers want soft skills, soft skills, soft skills. They do want soft skills, but your skills section is not where you put your soft skills. Sometimes we'll see people put attention to detail, hard worker, critical thinker, things like that. Those are definitely important, but you need to demonstrate those in your experience section, not try to call them out, because you can't prove that you have that skill, okay? All of the ones that you see listed here, you can prove that you have that skill, okay? Advanced Excel is something you either have it or you don't. So, and before I go on with that, a lot of times I'll see people put Microsoft Office, and just know you shouldn't put Microsoft Office, because the minimum expectation for people coming into jobs these days is that they know how to use, maybe not necessarily Outlook, because I probably would get lost in Outlook because I use Google, but those are kind of basic computer literacy skills is Microsoft Office. Now, in the sense, sometimes people will put Google Suite. Those are kind of basic and accepted. Excel and PowerPoint are the two that really carry weight, because Excel is something that takes a lot of practice to get good at, and PowerPoint basically shows that you can have done presentations and you have skills in doing presentations. Customer service is a hard skill. I'm telling you, if you worked at a restaurant, if you worked in retail, if you've done anything like that you probably think is just a jobs to pay the bills kind of thing, you have customer service skills, so definitely do that. Research and analysis, textual analysis, that's something that that all of you guys, the undergrads especially, have as a hard skill. Sales and business development, again, if you are in retail and you're doing sales, you can include those. Those are hard skills and they're in demand. And then in addition, if you have special technical skills, coding, R, Python, Tableau, any of, for cybersecurity, you can use pen testing, things like that. Any of your hard skills that you can put there.
I have a question here. Actually, I was going through one of the videos for the tips for writing this resume, and for the skills it was mentioned that you should use pipe operators, to separate out two skills. But what you're suggesting here is two columns, which I like that idea of two columns. I am in for that column, but then when they were suggesting it, it was like pipe separated skills.
It really just depends on your format and what works for your format. There's where you can have a little bit of flexibility. We like the pipes, the standing pipes for the heading.
Mm-hmm.
For that section, we like bullets and columns for the skill section, but that's not set in stone. It's what really works best with your basic format. As long as it's easy to read and it's something that it's easy for a human or a computer to parse what it is you're trying to say. So, and another thing I want to make sure that I mention is that Gabby, Christina, and I are all on the call. We're the career advisors, and we are more than happy, and not more than happy, it's our job to help you guys do your resumes. So, we want to give you the skills to get started and have you understand the reasoning behind our approach to resumes. But we're happy to help you play with it until it looks the way you want it.
So we can directly contact you, or there is some portal where we can, get in touch with you, your team.
You go to Handshake and you click Career Center and Appointments and schedule an appointment.
Okay.
Then your career advisor will automatically show up.
Okay.
And we do appointments, right, James?
Thank you.
James and I had an appointment not too long ago. So, okay, so I mentioned this before. Don't use attention to detail, hard worker, good communicator, passionate, those kind of things. It's not that those aren't important, because those are arguably more important than the hard skills, but you have to demonstrate. So try to think of how would you demonstrate attention to detail in one of your bullets. You could say that you analyzed reports and provided suggestions to management or something like that, something that shows that you demonstrated these kinds of things instead of just trying to call them out and not backing them up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip on. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind in the experience section is there's a special kind of resume language, and I've really fought with trying to figure out exactly how we word or how we describe resume language. I think it just kind of needs its own special label, but it's really first person understood. So you don't say I or me or my, and you avoid pronouns, because you're trying to clip out all the unnecessary language. So here's an example from before. I used Excel to analyze business trends that my manager presented to his boss, the CEO. So we're going to cut out the first person. We're going to cut out, the other pronouns and clearly say, analyze business trends and developed report for presentation to management. So we basically just focused on the important words and taken out some of the extraneous parts of the sentence to make it more concise. And again, I want to remind you that anything in your current position of what you're currently doing is present tense. Everything else is past tense. Nothing needs to be analyzes business trends and develops report for presentation to management. Never use, I guess that's second person. No, analyzes, I'm not sure, but just, you don't want to do that because I guess that's third person. You don't want to do that because that sounds like the job description. That sounds like you copied and pasted the job description. So it's saying, here's what someone in this job should do. Analyzes business trends and develops report, whatever. You want to talk about what you did. So you want to use a different format. So it's a little tricky, but again, we can help you out with that. I already talked about that. Yeah, question?
Yep. Under the experience, how should we show the gap which we have taken in the career? This is more important for all the women here. So it's not so much a thing as it used to be, especially COVID days. I was on a Wall Street Journal Jobs Summit conference a couple of days ago. And the CEO of ZipRecruiter was answering questions. And someone asked about gaps, and he said, job gaps just aren't that important. You just include your dates. And if
it comes up and someone asks you the question, what were you doing during this gap? As long as you have something to tell in your story about you don't have to go into details about your family. It's, I took a break for education, or I was doing other things, and guess what? They're not going to ask. It's a little bit of a touchy subject, especially with women. And so they usually will avoid those kinds of things. Employers are accustomed to people job hopping and things like that these days. So you do not need to address any kind of gap on your resume.
Oh, we don't need to address the gap. We just have to mention that we were not working in this. Or should we mention the date as well?
Don't even address it. If there's a gap in your employment, if you get an interview and you have a chance to discuss that, that's up to you. You want to discuss it. You should not address it on you, because it really just drives you to it more than anything. If you add it to your resume. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. It's when you're talking about your experience bullets, it's not about what was expected of any just Joe off the street was doing in the job. It's what you did in the job and how was the company better because of you. So that's why we're saying things like process 30 invoices, waited on 12 tables per shift or something like that, or chosen employee of the month 3 out of 7 months, or things like that. I'm kind of making these up off the top of my head, but what you're talking about is what you brought to the table and why the company was better off because you were in the job and not the next person. So that's why we don't want to copy and paste job descriptions, because that's just what would be the minimum expected of anybody. What did you do that was above and beyond?
I have heard that ATS tracking system has a way where it matches whatever you have mentioned in the skills, and under your experience section, if any one of those tools or skills have been utilized in your experience. Does that helpful for picking up the resume, or for recruiter to pick up those resume, or because if I have not worked on, I'm learning those skills, but I have not worked on something else.
Mm-hmm. So it's very helpful if you can use, so let's just say that you had advanced Excel as one of your skills. Then in your bullets, if you could say, okay, so look, this is a perfect example of this marketing intern. So if this person had Excel in their skills section, and then look at this second bullet, developed Excel spreadsheets to compile information. So demonstrating those skills, because there was a day and time where maybe recruiters took your word for it. Oh, okay, so she put here that she has Excel, so great, we're going to assume she has Excel. If you say how you used Excel, you've gone that next step and you've demonstrated that you have that experience. And yes, the ATSs are so sophisticated now that they can find words and phrases in context. So it's important that you do demonstrate those. And that's why you don't even need to bother with passionate, because what kind of bullet are you going to put for passionate? Something along the lines of, displayed my passion for waiting tables by, that just doesn't work. So that's why the hard skills and then actually taking the time to show how you use those skills is important. And you can see from these bullets here, how we tried, wrote over 100, boy, I never really thought about, that's a big number, 100 news releases, man. I think we oversold that one a little bit. I never thought about that. Anyway, these are kind of compilations of some great resumes that we've had. So conducted 5 research projects. This person was really busy and maintained all the content, so we put hard, firm numbers in here, and we showed how the different skills were used. And you'll notice, you can do the dates however you want. Some people prefer numbers. They may do 5/17 to 4/18. That's fine as long as you're consistent. As long as you're consistent all the way through. Be sure and put the location of where you worked as well, the title, the name of the company. Now, these don't have periods, and this is something that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me, because I was an English major, and if it's if it's a complete sentence, put a period. If it's not a complete sentence, you don't have to put a period. But if it's a complete sentence, put the period. You should have periods, but that's okay. Okay, so all right, we're getting close to I want to make sure we have enough time to go over the word section for Christina, but there's a couple of things I want to mention here for resume don'ts. And this is especially true for our international students because we've seen a lot of them in some other countries. It's appropriate to include your photograph. As a matter of fact, Dr. Baldona in the College of Business told us that everybody's resume has a photograph in India, that's one of the first things they saw. That's not appropriate in the US. Don't include your gender, anything about your family life, your date of birth, anything like that. There's actually even a push with recruiters on Handshake to not even include names. When they've opened a candidate hub on Handshake, and the recruiters have the ability to block the names so that they only see the students' information in their profiles, and they don't actually see the student's name, so that there's no implicit bias. So none of that stuff. Just to be safe, don't include anything like photo, gender, anything like that. Sometimes we see people put references available upon request. That's not necessary. If they want the references, they'll ask you for them, and that may be part of the application process, but don't worry about putting that. Don't put any of your references in. Save that for when they're asking for it. And design, don't try to use if you go into Microsoft and you open a document and you see that there's all these resume templates, you may say, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. I can go straight to this, but those are full of tables and their colors and things like that and funny fonts, and they really can mess up the ATS systems. If you're a graphic designer and you're going to a job fair and you in person one of these days and you hand a beautiful resume to a recruiter, that's a different story, but for most of us it's best just to use a simple, straightforward format. We like Microsoft Word because you have so much control over the document. We're saying here don't use Google Docs, or definitely don't use Pages, because it just screws everything up. Google Docs isn't ideal, but it's not the worst thing you could do. Microsoft Word just gives you a lot more control of the document, and it has a lot more things that allow you to fine tune it. But Google Docs isn't a worst case scenario, but we do prefer Word. Save it as a PDF unless the ATS tells you differently. My understanding is some of the ATSs now are telling you to submit it as a Word doc. So just follow the instructions, whatever it is. If you send it to your career advisor, we prefer a Word doc because then we can show you how to play with it and we can make some of the changes directly. One page, unless you have 8 to 10 years experience or more. We prefer Calibri or Times New Roman. Arial's fine, Helvetica's fine, a basic font, nothing fancy, no Palatina or whatever, as basic as you can get. And this was something the ZipRecruiter guy went on and on about too, was, what did he call it? System fonts, basic system fonts. Don't go below 10 because it's too hard to read. 12 is okay if you're just starting out and you don't have much on your resume. It's okay to do 12, but 11 is really the best. That's kind of the sweet spot. Don't go below 0.5 for margins. Don't go above 1 inch. Tailor the content for each position. We talked about that. We'll talk a little bit more in the next workshop about how to really get the content spot on. And this is an unformatted resume, and then this is how it's starting, and Christina's going to show you a couple of things on Word on how we took something like this and made it better. As you can see, for starters, it's all in italics, which is just absolutely nuts, but you can just see how long it would take a recruiter to try to find the important information in this. It would really be a challenge. And so Christina's going to show you how to use Word for some of the things that we mentioned. So I know there are probably going to be a few more questions, but let's let Christina get started on the Word section, and then I'm happy to stay on if we have more questions afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then Christina's going to share.
So I already actually took out all the italics to make it a little bit easier for everyone to read as I kind of go in through and edit. One of the first things I just want to say is if you're starting from scratch, what I'd actually recommend doing is going to Microsoft Office and going to New. And when you get here, usually most people just go to blank document. I will not lie, I do the same thing. When you do that, it goes into double space and it goes into 8-point spacing after and before each line. So what you actually want to do is actually go to single space blank. You won't actually have any of those problems at all if you do that. So that's like if you're starting from scratch, but as we talked about, Joe Groundhog here is starting with an unformatted kind of here and there resume, and I will just go over most of the simple basics, things that we highly recommend. So first for the heading for your name, you can actually have that in a bigger font than everything else, but after that, all of your additional fonts, so like your headline and the rest of the body of your resume should all be the same font. So here we have it on Calibri 11, and then for your headline, city and state. So this person, Joe over here, did asterisks. What we recommend doing is doing vertical lines. We call them pipe bars, vertical lines, whatever you want to call them. It is the line that is right above your enter key, and you just have to press shift with that key, and then you'll be able to get the vertical. Next is hyperlinks. So if you wanted to, let's first do that LinkedIn one because it's a lot simpler. So if you right click, go into link, and then here you go. Oh, this is actually in defaulted email. Here, www is for the address and everything there, but the text and display won't have that. One of the things I want to talk about too is that with LinkedIn, you can use a personalized URL. So for example, mine is linkedin.com/Min Christina Wynn. So it's a lot easier as opposed to having the default, which would have probably been like min-Christina-Win-45678. To make it a little bit simpler on yourself, you should do the personalized one. And then you'll do the same thing for the hyperlink for your email. You can do Control K, or you can just right click and do hyperlink. I just like doing the shortcut. Same thing here, email address. So it'll default to mail to. So when anybody who ever clicks it, it will just go straight to whatever their default is on their computer, and then they'll be able to email you.
Christina, will you go back to the LinkedIn and right click on that to edit? So see where it says text to display? If you just make that LinkedIn, then it'll just say LinkedIn at the top. Yeah, and so if anybody clicks on that, then they'll go to your LinkedIn. So see how much cleaner that looks, just to have it as hyperlinks. And if you send this as a Word document through email or something like that, someone will be able to click right there. Otherwise, you'll be able to include your LinkedIn in the application. So okay.
Right. And then no, you're fine. And then if you email it, we usually recommend sending a resume via email as a PDF to make sure it keeps all your formatting the same. And if you make sure that your hyperlinks are in Word when you convert, it'll also convert into PDF. So you'll be good to go. All right. Next is the insert line, my favorite. So when we're trying to separate the header from the rest of the body of your section, the reason that we use lines is help to differentiate it, and for a recruiter when they look at it, to look at it really quickly. A lot of people will insert line. Really, all you have to do is just highlight the text that you want, go to border, and this line is already here, go to bottom border, and we'll add your line for you. And that's usually the default I have right here. So then you can differentiate between your text and your header, which is really helpful.
If you tried to draw the line and you know how terrible that is, it doesn't stay aligned to the text, everything. This is so much easier.
Mm-hmm. Next is bullet points. And so right here for your skills, it's a little bit hard to read because everything's already flashed to the left. So if you highlight the text that you want, you can do it two ways right here. And then there's a pop-up. You can click on bullet, click there, I'll have your bullet points. A lot of people might try to be fancy and they'll use check marks or they use the arrows. I will tell you the truth, it's really distracting. I would just go with this simple circle. That's what most people expect, and it's pretty standard. And then the same thing here. So this person put actually 3 different skills into one line, probably because they're trying to save space. So what I would do is obviously separate those out. And then if you want to put this in half over here, and when you put it in columns, it helps give some symmetry to your resume. So as opposed to having everything that's like left heavy, you're also having it on the right side. So for that, you're just gonna highlight the text that you want. You're gonna go to layout and go to columns. And I usually like to do a default of 2 columns. That's just my personal preference. And I think it's just easier that way most of the time as opposed to doing 3. So that's the default for that one. For the bullet points as well as the columns, it just also makes it, you know, a lot cleaner on your resume to see kind of information on both ends. Next is I wanted to talk about bullets and italics. So like Shannon said, it's a lot about style. So usually what I do is for Bachelor's of Arts, I'll bold it and italicize. And then for University of Dallas, I'll bold that information. Because usually most people, if you're at like a big name company or at a university, they want to know where you're actually doing that experience. Real quick too, I'll go ahead and make this into bullets. So now you can read easily what the GPA was, study abroad, memberships, things like that. And here's the one I get questions about all the time. If you want information to be flushed right, you do not need to do tables. A lot of people will do tables because they just don't know how to flush all the way to the right. So what I recommend doing,
Space bar the whole thing over.
yeah, they'll space bar, they'll tab, I mean, they do everything. So what I recommend doing is I'm going to cut this real fast. If you want to make anything that's flushed right, all you have to do is click on the right, double click on the line that you want, and then paste, and that's it. The other thing you could do is if you go all the way to the right, you can just type in what you want to. So either way is perfectly fine, but that's, I mean, I'm telling you, it's so simple. You just double click on the right, it'll flush right everything for you. Okay, the next thing is, so for example, if you have this and you're just typing it really quickly, and maybe instead of having it, so we'll go ahead and insert the line again, like the border, and you see how we have education as the first letter capitalized, work experience as first letter capitalized. If you want to change it really quickly without having to type, you can go over here to the toolbar, and it's the uppercase A, lowercase a, this is change case. And what you can do is you can change this to whatever you want. So if you want it all uppercase, no, in all caps, you can do it really easily. If you want to capitalize each word, you can do that as well. So that just keeps consistency. So some students like to have everything in all caps. Some students like to capitalize each word. I would just say pick one and you'll be fine. And the last 2 things I wanted to talk about were just some basics. So it's like Shannon said about margins. Our default is usually 0.5 all the way around. This is what this resume is on, because this person has a lot of experience. If you don't have that much experience, you can go ahead and make it to a 1, or like you can do top 1 and then left and right on 0.75. Just do whatever you think is consistent. That's what's great about the resume, is that it's flexible in making it look like you might have a lot of experience when you don't. And then the last thing is just spacing. So if you actually did the default like I did, and I just go to blank page or blank document, and you need to change your spaces, you can always go to paragraph here, change it to instead of multiple, it'll be single, and then make this on 0 and 0. And that would make sure that all of your spaces are correct and there's nothing too crazy. Some students, what they like to do, is I've seen before, is they'll put all their fonts on like a 10, and then they'll put like spaces before and after, so it looks like their resume has more content than what it is. Guys, you can do that, but really just edit the font and edit the spacing as you see fit. But most of the time, just do the single space. Don't do anything fancy. You don't need to go crazy or anything with all of that. And that's really all I had on that. Is there any question? Did we have any? I saw some people in the chat, so I just didn't know if there was questions about what I had said in Word.
There were no questions about what you just did in the chat yet.
Okay, cool. So that's all the stuff I would have to say that's in Microsoft. Those are the typical things that we get a lot of the time. And the reasons we do this is obviously just because we know what recruiters like, in the sense of when they're looking at a resume and what information's there. This is an easy way for you to be able to see balance. They can get to the information they want really quickly. And it's like Shannon said, most of them actually just go to skills first, see if you have what's necessary, and then look at your experience to see if you have evidence to back up your statement of your skill section. So you just want to make sure that you do that. But these are the simple tips that we have. And then Gabby is actually going to send in the chat. We have a resume guide that has everything that we talked about. It has action verbs, And it has sample resumes as well, so you can look at those too.
James, is a Pell Grant's competitive, right? Yeah. I can't see you anymore, so I don't know if you
I'm not sure. I
anything
think it's like a financial.
right.
Right.
But if it's competitive at all, then you can put it. If it's not competitive, it probably doesn't bring anything to the table. But if it's competitive, anything competitive, you would want to include in there.
Okay.
So a lot of people, a lot of people will put like Dean's List 2018, fall 2018, spring 2019, fall 20, you know, and that's not really necessary. I mean, just put Dean's List and, you know, honor roll or whatever, you know, and list your, definitely list your any scholarships that you have. Again, an employer doesn't know the difference between the provost scholarship, the dean's scholarship, or something else. If it's a really big fancy scholarship, like you got a full ride or something like that, then you can describe that in a bullet. But kind of our basic scholarships that we see for students at UD, then you can, you know, just list those scholarships out. And I think I mentioned this before, but you can include your high school information up through sophomore year, definitely not anything after sophomore year. And if you have a lot of, you know, clubs and orgs and involvement on campus as a freshman, and you don't need it to sort of fill out your space, you don't need to include it. And I'm sorry, I'm looking the wrong direction. My camera's here and the screen's you guys.
I would add also think about what you're applying for, and you know the things that you decide to include can all depend upon what you're applying for. So if you want to show that you know you have a long history of service ever since high school, then you could absolutely include anything you've volunteered for during high school up to now. And it really all depends on you know what you want the employer to know about you. For instance, we had a person from Southwest Airlines talked to us a few years ago, and he still had Eagle Scout on his resume, and he's almost like he's in his 40s, but he wanted to show that he has the servant spirit, you know, the service aspect to you know himself ever since he ever started working. So that's why he decided to keep it on there. So that's just an example of you know just knowing your audience and knowing when to keep things on and when to take them off.
And guys, I highly encourage you to make an appointment with one of us, because even though we handed you all this on a silver platter, we'll still help you format it. You know, we'll dive in, we'll indent, we'll change to bold. We want to show you what we're thinking when we're doing it. So, you know, 5 years from now and you're moving on to your next job, you kind of know what you're doing, but we're happy to help you guys out. All you got to do is go to Handshake to make an appointment. Okay. All right. So you guys, if you want to talk more about content, I know this was the most exciting hour that you spent in weeks on end. So if you want to do it all over again next Thursday, we're happy to have you. We'll talk a little bit more about how to write the bullets to get them to really stand out and to communicate what you want. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much, you guys.